Welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're talking with Frank Harrison about travel risk management. Frank, great first and second segment. In our third segment here, I'd like to talk about crisis management and why that's important and why organizations should really have something in place.
Crisis management's a real unique area. You get into business continuity, resilience, crisis management. And I'll be very direct. A lot of organizations spend really good company money to go out, hire consultants to build them these beautiful binders with checklists and all kinds of annexes to deal with every crisis imaginable. And immediately when a crisis breaks out, the last thing they do is go to the room that has the binders in it. So a lot of the work I've done in my past, one of the things I'll do is if I'm running a crisis management exercise, I'll go to that crisis management room and I take the binders and I hide them because organizations need to understand the risk environments they operate in. They need to have the right people on their crisis management and emergency management teams that are trained to respond to an event, not a prescripted event, because no two events will ever be the same. So it's understanding the right leadership in the room with the right skills and the right delegations of authorities so that when an event is being managed, the right decision makers are involved. Because I've been in too many situations where an event is starting to occur and people get bogged down in the minutia of following policy, following procedures, reading checklists. And I'll give you an example. I worked for a major oil and gas company in Asia Pacific. I was based in Papua New Guinea, and we had a tsunami alert. So we called our crisis management team together. They went into the room. The leadership team went into a room, and I took my two superintendents and our quick reaction team. We went out, accounted for all of our individuals and their family members that were in low-lying areas, and we had that done within about 10 minutes. And then we had an international school that was near our office. We rolled in with our buses and vehicles and offered to support them if they needed to evacuate. We supported the school in getting their students up to higher ground. We were back in our office, and about 45 minutes into the crisis team being in a room locked down with their binders, my manager, health and safety, walked out and said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And I just handed him a radio and I said, "It's already done." And he said, "What do you mean it's already done?" He said, "All our people are accounted for. People are in high ground. Now we're just in a watch phase to see what's going to happen." So in the 40 minutes it took the leadership team to come to the conclusion that we needed to account for our people, we did it. So what it demonstrated is if you get caught up in the process of crisis management, you're not actually doing crisis management. You're doing administrative tick in the boxes. So my advice to an organization is identify the people that you want in the room who have the right leadership, train them to make decisions, and let them do it. And the old adage of have a whiteboard in the room, I live by that in a crisis. You start putting stuff on the board, making people accountable, and start drawing out lines of responsibility. And you do it in the moment, because if you try to do it any other way, it's going to break down. I was in the fire service for a while, and you don't roll a fire truck onto the fire ground to deal with an incident and then stand there discussing how you're going to pull the hoses off and do everything. You train people to be able to respond to the event that they face and to use the right at the time decisions to deal with the issue. Because ultimately, if you don't, your crisis becomes a crisis for the team.
Well, what about those organizations who have people on their crisis management team simply because they are the vice president type thing? They have a title, so that means she's in charge of XYZ. But sometimes she or he may not be the right person for that role.
That's from an organizational standpoint, and that goes back to the comment. Make sure you got the right people in the room. And if just by the delegation of authority you need to have the vice president in the room and you understand their limitations, you need to also have a backup person that can actually do the role. And I'll use an example. I was working in West Africa a number of years ago, and in the middle of a crisis event, the vice president of HR got up out of the room sitting in the Canary Islands, walked out and left, never came back. One of the key decision makers for the crisis response just walked out of the room and never came back. And nobody knew what to do because nobody understood what that person's role was. So this is one where understand the people in the room, understand what their delegation of authority is, and if they aren't the ones to be making decisions or they can't do it, get someone in the backfill for them that can.
And I liked your example there where you, the Papua New Guinea example, where 45 minutes later, they finally making a decision. You said, well, we've already done it. So does that mean a good crisis management team or structure should also be proactive, not just reactive?
They need to be reactive, and it's hard to get proactive individuals. So one of the things that I've done historically is you have your crisis management team, and then you have an IMT or a CMT below that, or an EMT. So you'll have that higher level team that's sitting in the room. They're the decision makers. But then you have the team that's just below that, that's either at the event site or they have the ability to support the event site. So that you end up with two levels of interaction. You got the ones that are decision makers, have the authority, and then you have that team that's actually, to use an analogy, they're the ones on the back of the fire truck going in to put the fire out. And when they get off, they're going to pull the hoses. They're going to use the right techniques. They're going to knock the fire down, do the rescue, get the people out of the building. So there's not a lot of organizations that have that structure. And when I'm
Mm.
out doing consulting work for organizations, it is a recommendation that you have your CMT and then you have to have an IMT or an EMT below them that actually can execute.
So how do you bring all this together? You've got your crisis management plan or team members and structure in your organization, but let's say I'm the business traveler again and I'm stuck in somewhere and there's an incident that I'm involved with. How do you bring the organization's crisis management together with the response and the services you bring together? And then myself, who's somewhere else? How do you bring all this together? That's got to be one hell of a challenge.
So let's use Ukraine. Who would have thought 2 years ago we would have had, or almost 900 days ago now, that we would have had a war in most, an invasion of the Ukraine. So you look at when you have a crisis management team, if you go in and ask an organization, when was the last time they sat that team in a room and did a tabletop exercise, you'd be shocked to learn a lot of organizations do not invest in the time to train their CMTs, their EMTs, IMTs. They form the committees, they have the binders sitting in a room, and in some cases, the first time they've ever actually started into a response is
Mm.
when they're dealing with a live response. They'll have Alex, you're sitting in Ukraine. Your facility that you're visiting has just been blown up by hostile state actors, and you need to get out of there. But your organization also has just lost a prime production facility, and that is not the time to start figuring out how a crisis management team works. Organizations need to either quarterly or every 6 months set that team in a room, walk them through a tabletop exercise, run through a full scenario, so they understand the decision making processes, the communications processes, and what leadership is in a crisis management event. I catch myself every now and then. We'll have an event, and my first reaction is lock the doors, nobody leaves, because we need everybody in the room. But it's making sure that the team is properly trained and socialized on the crisis management processes before they actually have to do a live event, because that's not the time to learn.
Would that also include being more involved with what's happening with third parties and partners?
Absolutely.
Using yourself and your team as an example, understanding what does the organization get from you, what information do you need from us, so that Alex, who's over in Ukraine, is safe and can get home okay.
It's the information is critical, and with our portal and our intelligence systems and how we communicate that out to our customers and their end users, We don't offer a virtual SOC. We don't offer any of that. But we will support an organization with their security operations centers or their crisis operations processes, and we can do direct inputs right into those teams that are managing an event, or we can be on the periphery as an advisor as needed. And it all comes down to the maturity of an organization, their risk appetite, and the types of information they need to be able to make critical decisions. So if we look at, uh, I'm just trying to think of a good example here, where you get an event where you've got a loss of continuity in supply chain, where the Evergreen went aground in the Suez Canal.
Mm.
May not seem like a big deal, but you look at the business impact that had globally, and then within the Zurich family of businesses, there were a number of covered entities that grounding had an absolute dire impact on their business programs and their business resiliency, and they had to call crisis management teams, bring in part of the Zurich business to support them. And it's just making sure that you've got the right assets and people to support those decision makers. And we're in the risk management space, and the one thing that we all are very good at within our space is supporting our customers in making informed decisions.
Why do you think sometimes organizations don't focus very well on crisis management outside of the lack of training and the lack of reading their binders and things like that? Do, do you think there's some other underlying point of why some of these organizations and leadership just don't give crisis management the attention it deserves?
You get into human beings will always revert to type. So if we look at what happened during the pandemic, we took business continuity and resiliency and stuff like travel authorizations went right up to CEO, CFO, COO level. So they had full oversight on what their organizations were doing, especially from a travel lens. You look now 3 years after the fact, most organizations, that authority is gone. Most organizations have lost sight on where their travel programs and approval processes are. And I've gone into businesses where you ask them, who's actually your travel approver? And by the time you have the full conversation with them, it might be a little bit of the finance team, a little bit of HR, a little bit of the safety team. And in most cases, it's been reverted to the person that sits at the front desk as the administrative assistant for the company. And where are we today? We shouldn't be there. We had all of these learnings that occurred over the past 5 years, and we've reverted back to pre-2019 models of risk management. So you get into, we've had all this learning, and you'll go in and talk to C-suite level people, and they'll tell you, "Oh, that'll never happen." And
Yeah.
as soon as you hear that'll never happen, you know that the path to inevitability has just been struck.
I remember somebody years ago said, as soon as you hear that, they're doomed
Yep.
when something
And
else.
that's where it's incumbent on us in our industry then that we have to have that conversation where it's not a sales pitch, it's just a reckoning speech that, look, here's your risk posture, here's your risk appetite, this is your risk perception, and you have a distinct opportunity to better your duty of care and to close the gaps that are putting you, your business, and your people at risk. And it takes a lot of very crafted conversations to be able to get that through to some C-suite level people because it comes down to its time, cost, budget, and program. And if they don't have a lot of financing to support programs right now, travel risk is one of the ones that gets the first cut.
That and business continuity.
Business
I know for
continuity.
sure.
Yep.
We only have a few minutes left, but I'm wondering, I know you've got so many impactful and very, you know, nerve white knuckle stories to tell, I'm sure. Do you have anything that's happened that's been kind of funny in this that you just kind of, I can't believe that happened, you know, anything like that?
I'm going to steer away from the funny moments because when we're dealing with our customers, we're dealing with individuals that are dealing with real life impacting events.
Mm,
And I don't want to cast humor onto some of these events because they're very impactful to the individuals. But I'll give you an example of where having a unified team in one spot can work. We were doing an evacuation out of Botswana, last year, and the medical team um, was about to call a mission because they couldn't get the plane into the airport before the airport closed. So I'm listening to the conversation, and I just did the meerkat, stood up, looked over the wall, and said, "Can you give me 3 minutes?" And I went into the IATA, the aviation sites, found the phone number for the control tower at that airport, called it, spoke to the flight services specialist who gave me the number for the airport manager, called him at home as he was having his dinner, introduced myself, explained why I was calling, and just said, "We need the airport to remain open for an extra hour so we can do an evacuation." He had no idea there was an evacuation coming in, but understanding the circumstances and the impact of the individual that needed to get out, he kept the airport open for that 1 hour, and we were able to successfully get the person out, get him back into South Africa for care. But that 1 hour, all it took was one phone call, and we saved the the insurance firm, $40,000. Because if we had to do the evac the next day, it would have been the sunk cost of the aborted mission and then a new mission. So just being able to pick up the phone, make a phone call, and make something happen. Yeah, we saved some money, but we also got that person out and got them into a hospital, got them into advanced treatment sooner, and we're able to resolve their issue.
Well, good. That's good to hear. Well, based on that, we've come to the end of the show, Frank. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Alex.
I really appreciate you sharing your time, and shout out to Joel for recommending me reaching out to you. I really appreciate the conversation and the stories today. Thank you so much. And everyone watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.